Joining us now via Zoom chat is Charlie Spiering. He's the White House correspondent at Breitbart. Good morning to you, Mr. Spiering.
Good morning. How are you?
Praise be to God, I am alive, and that counts. How are you, sir?
Doing fantastic.
Last week, there was a story that was hitting the news, and then, of course, the overturning of Roe v. Wade sort of changed all of that. But there was a little tit-for-tat going on between President Joe Biden and his administration and oil executives, and some oil executives got a little bit more sensitive, as President Biden might say, than others. Can you tell us the backstory?
Yeah, so the president's kind of trying to leverage Americans against the oil companies, and so that they blame oil companies for high gas prices and not him. And so it's been this kind of back and forth. It's interesting that Biden sort of refuses to meet with the oil executives as typically a president would do when he's trying to encourage them to be patriotic and produce more oil. But in this case, he sort of shuffled that meeting off to Jennifer Granholm and choosing rather to do this like back and forth between the oil companies and his administration, just demanding that they just lower those gas prices and produce more oil. And we can, this is me putting it, taking this issue very seriously, because that's how you lower gas prices, is just by telling them to do it.
Now, at first I thought, this has just got to be a PR stunt. He's just doing this for the press or something. But then he actually wrote them a letter, did he not?
Yeah, this is kind of interesting. Obviously, it was a couple of weeks ago. He tried to just sort of spook the oil companies by threatening to use his emergency powers, and that includes emergency war powers. So, wow, sending the signal that he's prepared to sort of nationalize the oil industry if they don't listen to him. Well, that's kind of a ridiculous proposal at this point. But it was a letter meant to generate headlines, and yeah, the oil companies definitely had some reaction to that. They had some specific proposals that they sent to him and asked him to, here's what we need to produce more oil. But it's not very clear that the Biden administration is taking any of that seriously at this point.
So when he says war powers, if we're not at war, or are we at war, that would give him the powers to be able to enact these threats?
Yeah, the legal definition is sort of hazy at this moment, right? He could claim that that Putin's war in Ukraine, makes it necessary to do. This is something he hasn't put out in detail. Him and his lawyers haven't put out in detail, but putting that message out there certainly tries to drive headlines. Certainly tries to get some more people aware of what he could do. And it's really unclear exactly how he would go. He's not likely to go that far at this point, but he's trying to rattle the cage.
I mean, we've given how many billions of dollars to Ukraine? How many missiles and weapon systems? I mean, that sounds like war to me.
Yeah, well, that's where we're at with the Ukraine war. Biden just announced a plan. He's in Europe right now, and he just announced a plan to provide Ukraine with surface-to-air missiles. Now, that's another significant investment in Ukraine's war power. But he hasn't sort of demonstrated that he's willing to send troops into Ukraine. That's sort of the line he hasn't crossed yet. But as he continues to escalate the amount of equipment and arms to Ukraine and the amount of support, he'll be in that he's already planning to send more troops to Poland. So it's only a matter of time before Putin starts raising, starts getting a little bit concerned about the level of interaction that Biden and the Ukrainians have.
Mr. Spiering, I'm curious to get an update also on this meeting that was supposed to take place between Joe Biden and the Prince of Saudi Arabia. That was supposed to happen this month, but it got pushed to next month. Do you have any updates on that? And what do you anticipate that will do to increase oil production? Will it even affect any of the prices here in America, do you think?
Yeah, that's interesting, because there was a conversation between the French president, Emmanuel Macron, and Biden that took place. He's over in Europe right now at the G7 summit, and Macron pulls him aside, kind of in front of the news media camera. So it's kind of a weird little moment of international diplomacy. But Macron tells him that the United Arab Emirates and the Saudis are already at full production, and it's unlikely that they'll be able to increase production. Now, wow, if that's true, then yeah, Biden's trip is a waste of time. And if he can't convince OPEC nations to produce more oil, then there's really only two places to get more oil. One is from the United States, increasing domestic production, and two is from all of these pariah states that we're trying to sanction: Russia, Venezuela, Iran. These are the three oil-centric nations that Biden could end up turning to if he wants to increase oil without increasing it in the United States.
Not to divert from the topic of the gas prices and the issue between oil execs and Biden, but while he was there, President Joe Biden announced, along with the other members, a $600 billion, sort of anti-Belt and Road initiative. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is something that the West, the G7 nations have talked about, is increasing these global investments to counter what China's doing with their Belt and Road initiative. So China is giving all of these countries money to build infrastructure, but pulling in the strings and sort of keeping them in prisoners of debt to their country so that they can sort of leverage that power for global control eventually. The G7 is trying to combat that with their own investments. And yeah, Biden's putting in a huge chunk of cash, private and public funding that he wants to. So this is the first step by Western nations to sort of combat and show, these developing nations, hey, work with us, not China. But, too much of it is involved in, in sort of the blocking the intentional investments that the United States wants to do. They want to invest in green energy, providing more childcare, and so those sort of investments will be limited by sort of an ideology.
So let's go back to the oil execs. Chevron, in particular, seemed a lot more forthright in their response to him than, say, Exxon did. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting seeing the willingness for oil companies kind of poke back at Biden, because Biden's been just sort of making them the enemy and sort of insisting that they're the ones being greedy and not concerned about their customers. Well, they don't like to hear that, and so that for the Chevron CEO to sort of poke back at that is telling, because it shows that they're not that afraid of Biden, because his approval ratings are really low at this point. So it's interesting to see the oil companies standing up for themselves against the president of the United States.
Yeah, it's not something you see every single day. And I've always thought you take the good times with the bad times when it comes to gas prices. I mean, when gas prices are low for us, their profits are lower. When gas prices are high, they're making out. So does it all even out? But these seem extraordinary times. The gas prices are historically high. How do you see that?
Yeah, we're dealing with record high gas prices, and certainly we're driving around and seeing that $5 mark on so many gas stations around the country. Yeah, but for all those who are living in LA, it's normal to have your gas prices be $2 above what they used to be and what they are in the rest of the country. But yeah, if it wasn't for Biden's persistent agenda on clean energy, all of those clips that are being recirculated of him vowing to end the fossil fuels industry, especially during his primary, telling people, look into my eyes, I will end the fossil fuel industry. And, to have those clips resurfacing at this point really just show that Americans know who's at fault at this point. Biden's and his administration have been hilariously trying to run around and promote this Putin's price hike thing for about a month, maybe more than a month now. But American people aren't really buying it.
About the oil companies in particular, like what if they wanted to? What could they do under the current circumstances? I know that they sent a list. We want you to do this. We want to turn things back to the way it was under the Trump administration. We were exporting. Things were good. But I know that's what they want. But if they could, like, what could they do under the current circumstances to improve? And if they could do something, why wouldn't they? I'm curious. What say you, Mr. Spiering?
Yeah, it's sort of an economic question at this point. What's interesting is that, the for refining capacity, so many of our refineries have been sort of pressed out of commission and shut down because of the the incredible environmental regulations have pushed some of these aging refineries out of business. And I think this is the case, that there hasn't been a major refinery built in the United States since the 70s. And so and the old ones are starting to die out and being pressed out of service. And this is part of the ongoing agenda to sort of push out fossil fuels and replace, this is what Biden and his allies in the green industry want: press out, domestic oil production and refining and replace it with something. And replace it with clean energy. So this is sort of the issue. Like, if you're an oil company and you're being asked to, invest billions of dollars to a new refinery, why would you do that if it's just going to be pressed out of service in the next 10, 20 years by clean energy? So that's sort of what they're dealing with here. And sort of that's why the Biden administration thinks they can just rely on the Middle East to do all the oil production until clean energy takes over. Well, it's showing that sort of plan isn't working really, especially if they're sort of at maximum capacity. The only thing we can do to boost our domestic production is to boost it domestically. So it'll be interesting to see if the Biden administration actually, proposes some domestic, refining and production ideas, or if they're just going to stick with the status quo.
What role does ESG scores at these financial institutions play? It seems to me that that's also another angle. Even if President Biden were to come out and say, you know what, I'm opening up all these leases, drill to your heart's content, do whatever you want. It seems to me that these oil companies are now having trouble getting the financing they need to do that sort of exploration, because financial institutions want them to diversify into clean energy. Well, is there anything to that?
Yeah, that's a very good point. We have so many financial investment companies that just aren't willing to invest into oil because they're getting pressure from their investors and everyone else to stop investing in dirty oil. That there's a certain level of messaging that they want to have on that. Like, we only invest in clean energy. That's why, more billionaires should give us your money, because we're responsible. We have a conscience to protect the planet from climate change. So there is that aspect, very much so. And you certainly see, like, oil companies being sort of portrayed as this pariah going forward, and they're going to have to continue to figure out a way to say, oh, but we also care about energy.
Mr. Spiering, one of the biggest arguments that I've heard about this whole situation is that, there's a confusion really between what can the president really do versus what can the oil companies do. Is there what is the truth here? Because one of the underlying facts of the story is that Biden claims that the oil companies are being greedy, that they're capable of doing it. What's the truth here? Is it really that the president has no control over this, or what can he do to increase production here in the United States?
Well, you saw this, if you guys remember the Colonial Pipeline hack back then, when on the East Coast was hit with a sudden spike in gas prices. One of the things he did was sort of reduce the EPA requirements. And that was something that was unprecedented and something that, the greenies weren't too happy about. Mm-hmm. So he could certainly do more regulatorily, just short term, to sort of lift some of these requirements on refining capabilities. That's one thing he could do that he has done before. But yeah, you're right. Like, this is the problem with the Biden administration. Their previous policies are what brought us to this moment, and it's very hard to untangle. Same with inflation. His previous policies are what could have caused this inflation, and it's very hard to lower inflation once that goes up. So Biden's really hit a moment where his previous policies are the things that are creating the current crisis today, and he has to face that. And this is why we elect leaders to be leaders, is for leaders to do policies that actually bring about good results, not fix problems as they arise, to anticipate these problems ahead of time and prepare for them. And Biden is constantly being seen as a reactive president, not a leadership president.
You know, one thing that I was thinking of during the break is the whole idea of the tax breaks, and there's a lot of questions around that. Some people are saying that it would have no effect whatsoever. Some people are saying it would have a huge effect, and some people are saying it'll actually make things worse. And I am trying to wrap my head around all these different ideas. You would think that even if it would just make things better just a little bit, that would make sense. But what's going on with the tax breaks?
You're talking about the gas tax holiday?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the gas tax holiday is a sort of a politically popular message to send out, but Biden's only doing this for show. He has no intention of actually moving forward on this. Congress has no intention of passing a gas tax holiday. You know, if Biden was serious about it, he could sort of maneuver the federal government to stop collecting this gas tax. But instead, he just stands up and says, I support this. I urge Congress to get it done. I urge states to do the same thing. You know, it's not happening. Biden is just showboating for the cameras at this point. It would take a few cents off the price of gas. You know, Biden claims that between the federal and state, that's about $1 in savings. But yeah, to be clear, Congress has no intention of getting that done. And this is very much just a political move by Biden before he heads over to the Middle East to beg for more oil.
That's fun, isn't it? So what's the near-term future here? I mean, we have midterms coming up. It seems like America is responding negatively. President Biden's approval ratings are at a historic low. There was a report out, I think yesterday, the day before, that at least 1 million people have switched their party of choice in the voting rolls in anticipation of the midterms. So much is at stake. Do you see this issue finding relief or getting worse in the near term?
Yeah, it's gonna get worse. I think gas prices are going to continue to stay high. Inflation is going to stay high. Biden's best hope is that it stops, right? It stops rising and starts remaining level, and then he can focus on how do we bring it back down. But as we've seen, these prices continue to rise. The inflation continues to rise. So he's got a real problem on his hands. And yeah, politically, he's in real trouble. And we look forward to a future Republican control of Congress, and that's when it'll be very interesting as they sort of go back and forth on this messaging war, who's trying to help and who's blocking progress on these issues. So it'll be very interesting to see what Biden's presidency becomes when Democrats are no longer in control, when he's no longer beholden to so many leftist pressures in his party when they're out of power.
The hypocrisy gets me, I think, a lot. They talk about green renewable energy and, helping the planet and all of these other things, but at the same time, they don't talk about the fact that all of these Teslas are filled with coal-burned generated electricity. They're not filled up by solar panels. They're not filled up by wind power. They don't talk about the sheer destruction and amount of effort and energy required to pull these minerals out of the earth in order to create the lithium batteries that they love so much, nor do they talk about the impact on the Congolese who are send their children and the poorest of the poor down into these home-dug wells, and regardless of the birth defects that now pollute their waterways and cause these issues, like they just ignore all of the downsides and they try to play up the upsides. Barack Obama installing 2,500-gallon propane tank in his Martha's Vineyard home. Is that renewable? Is that green? I don't think so. Why is there such blatant hypocrisy on this issue?
Yeah, if I had to guess, I would say that it's because of financial interest. We know the left is massively invested in clean energy technologies, not for economic reasons, but because they have the handle on the power to sort of force away fossil fuels, and they have already invested heavily in green energy as being the future. So they have a financial reason to continue ignoring the problems, the dirty problems of clean energy. So you're going to continue to see that as these, these leftist billionaires who have control of the Democrat Party, using them to sort of close down the dirty oil industry. They're focused on only that one thing, preaching the gospel of climate change to sort of transfer the economy into their pockets. So you're going to see a lot of that, and yeah, it's all the hypocrisy of electric cars will only be exposed if the consumer realizes that, hey, it's not worth spending an additional $10,000-$20,000 to get an electric car. My savings aren't that much. Maybe I should just stick with a traditional gas-powered vehicle because it's more secure, because it's more reliable. We've already seen sort of reports of these, some of these electric cars starting on fire. How long do those batteries last, right? They're going to run out, and you got to spend thousands of dollars to replace the battery. It'll ultimately be decided by the consumer. If the consumer sees electric cars as cool, as valuable, then this industry is going to take off. But as it's being artificially propped up by the government at this point, but with heavy subsidies, it'll be interesting to see.
All right.
Whether that's
out of time with Charlie Spiering, Breitbart News. Thank you so much. Praise be to God. We're grateful for your time, Charlie. Catch us in the next hour if you can. Otherwise, we'll see you back here tomorrow.